So the next video is how to manage bleeding or hemorrhage.
Okay, so what we're going to demonstrate now is how to manage bleeding from a limb, and the immediate actions that you should do when you see, I guess, quite impressive or torrential bleeding from a limb. The immediate thing you want to do before you do any further assessment of the patient is try to get hemorrhage control on that, what we'd call a catastrophic hemorrhage. So immediate actions on bleeding from a limb will be just to get direct pressure on the bleeding. So you're applying direct pressure either just immediately with your hand, but then swiftly moving on from that, you want to be grabbing something like a bandage and applying that onto the bleeding site. As you're doing that, you want to be elevating the limb, and then you want to be assessing how effective that is. So in this case, we're going to see that there's a large bleed that's occurring, and we're going to apply a tight bandage around the wound. And as we do that, we're going to be assessing to see how effective that is. So in this case, it looks as though the bandage we've applied or are applying has been effective in controlling the bleeding. So once we've applied the bandage, what we're going to do is assess the blood supply distal to the bandage. So we can have a look at the colour of the hand, we're going to assess the capillary refill, and we're going to feel for the pulses. And we're going to see, and that will inform us, I guess, whether there's arterial injury, but we'd also consider, if there was an absence of pulses, whether the bandage was too tight. We're going to assess that for its effectiveness, and we're going to keep the limb elevated, and we're going to keep the bandage on in order to control that bleeding. And that will allow us to move on to assess other injuries and treat those as we go. If this bandage that we've applied to this large or fairly torrential bleed is ineffective, then we're going to keep the bandage on, but we're going to have to, rather than just applying the direct hemorrhage control, we're going to have to go for indirect hemorrhage control. And the way we're going to do that is to use a device like this or something similar. Improvised devices can be used as well. So if I get you to hold that bandage there, Steve, just until we secure that. So this is a Tourniquet. This is a commercially available device. But what we're going to do is we're going to apply this proximal to the wound. So I'll place that over there. And we're going to try and place it as distal as possible, albeit proximal to the wound, but distal to prevent more tissue becoming ischemic than is necessary. We're going to try to avoid placing it directly against or next to joints, such as the elbows. And we're going to tighten this device. So this is a combat application tourniquet, which works with a Velcro strap and a windlass to allow it to be tightened. So we're going to pull it nice and tight. And sort of no matter how tight I pull it with that Velcro strap, it's not going to occlude arterial flow. So it's likely this wound will still be bleeding. But by then tightening the windlass, we should be able to get arterial control, as that pressure of this tourniquet will occlude the arterial supply to the bleed. So we're going to tighten that. And these devices, or tourniquets generally, are really painful. So the patient's going to be not enjoying this going on, but it's a potentially life-saving intervention that we can do. So I'm going to put this windlass and secure it in there. And on this device, there's space to write what time you've applied the tourniquet. And it's important to note what time you've applied the tourniquet. So let me just tidy that up. So we're going to write down what time we've applied it there. Once we've applied the tourniquet, we're going to reassess the bleeding, which should now be controlled because we've got this proximal control of the vessels which is supplying the bleed. But we should reassess the neurovascular status of the limb. The pulses, if the device is correctly applied, should now be absent. You want to keep the tourniquet on in order to prevent arterial bleeding, but during the time when it's on, there will be clot formation, the bandage may be becoming more effective in itself, So it's appropriate, I think, after 30 minutes, if the clinical situation and scenario allows it, to gently, carefully and cautiously undo the tourniquet to then see what the status is of the wound. You don't want the limb to be ischemic for too long. Obviously that comes with its own risks. So it's often appropriate after 30 minutes to just carefully take down the tourniquet and undo it to see if the bandage is now effective.